Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, as always, to take a stack of source material, really analyze the core insights, and then deliver the knowledge you need.
Quickly and thoroughly.
Exactly. And today, we are immersing ourselves in a rich collection of research focused on maybe the single most debated quality in leadership: courage.
Right. We're calling this deep dive Fear, Faith, and the Anatomy of Courage.
It's a big topic.
It is. And these sources we're analyzing, they approach courage not as some, secular virtue, but as something fundamentally redefined through a faith-based lens, particularly for high-stakes leadership.
Okay, so what's our mission for you, the listener, today?
The mission is to move beyond the modern cultural myth of courage, which is, let's be honest, often just emotional bravado, and to build a deeper, more resilient framework, one that's rooted in what the sources call obedient trust.
And that's where the tension starts immediately, right?
Yeah.
Because we've been taught, I think, that courage only shows up after the fear is gone.
It's the classic misconception.
Yeah. As professionals, as leaders, we wait. We wait to feel brave enough before we actually do the thing.
And the sources are so clear on this. Waiting for that emotional certainty is probably the most reliable way to stay completely stagnant.
Because courage, at its core, it's not a feeling at all.
No, it's movement. It's often a trembling movement toward what obedience requires.
So what's the cost of getting this wrong? When fear is treated like a defect?
The cost in leadership is enormous. Leaders delay critical decisions. They start to confuse their own anxiety with some kind of profound spiritual discernment.
Which it isn't.
Not at all. And then leadership just gets reduced to risk management instead of, faithful, often really uncomfortable action.
So the question we're really asking today, based on these sources, is what if fear isn't the enemy of courage, but the very setting in which it's formed?
That's the radical premise.
So if we accept that disobedience, not fear, is the opposite of courage, what does that actually look like for a leader who's facing massive uncertainty? Let's unpack this biblical reframe.
Well, it means accepting this radical redefinition that courage is not emotional confidence. The key thing is that Scripture, it doesn't sanitize fear. It doesn't pretend its greatest figures weren't afraid.
It treats fear as a human constant.
A constant, not a failure. I mean, think about it. Prophets wrestle. Apostles face intimidation. David was terrified of his enemies. Jeremiah feared his own inadequacy. Fear is just expected. It's acknowledged. Courage is the choice you make in its presence.
Okay, let's go to the ultimate example that completely reframes this. Christ in Gethsemane. The sources really zero in on this.
They have to, because that moment, it directly contradicts this idea that courage requires emotional composure. The source material, specifically from Luke, details this anguish that was so intense it became physical.
The sweat falling like drops of blood.
Yes. This wasn't minor anxiety. This was visceral, overwhelming dread of the task ahead. And yet, in the face of that, he submitted. Not my will, but yours be done.
The insight there is so crucial. Fear was fully present,
Fully present.
but disobedience was completely absent.
Precisely. And that proves that the feeling of fear itself isn't the sin. It's just the arena where perfect obedience gets tested. I mean, if Christ experienced fear, who are we to expect it to be absent from our lives?
And you see this principle way back in the Old Testament too, right? With the Joshua mandate.
Perfect example. Joshua is stepping into Moses' massive shadow, facing this impossible task of invading the Promised Land.
And God just keeps telling him, be strong and courageous.
Right. But that wasn't a pep talk to make him feel confident. It was an instruction. It was an order to obey the marching orders before the feeling of confidence arrived. The only anchor he had was the promise, I will be with you.
So the mandate was for action, not a guarantee of a brave feeling.
That's foundational. True courage anchors itself in the promise, not in a prediction of a good outcome.
Okay, so if that's the definition, where does fear even come from? The sources suggest it's more than an emotion, that it's a diagnostic tool.
It absolutely is. You trace it all the way back to Eden. Humanity's original design was fearlessness, right? But that fearlessness was anchored in complete trust.
When the trust collapsed, fear began.
Exactly. Adam's first confession after the fall is, I was afraid, so I hid. So fear is relational first. It's a symptom of broken trust before it's just, emotional distress.
So how does that relational fear act as a diagnostic tool for, say, the modern professional?
Well, when you stop running from fear and you actually examine it, it exposes exactly what you cling to for control, what you're protecting at all costs, where your trust is misplaced.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you feel crippling anxiety about speaking a difficult truth to your team. That fear isn't just social anxiety, it might be revealing an idol of approval.
Ah, so you're more afraid of losing their validation than of disobeying the command, to be honest.
Exactly. Or, acute anxiety over finances might reveal an idol of wealth or self-sufficiency. Fear reveals our idols way faster than success or comfort ever will.
That makes so much sense. I want to pause on the linguistic clarity the sources provide, because you mentioned the ancients didn't just have one word for fear.
And that distinction is essential. It informs our whole strategy. In Hebrew, you have two main terms. There's yara, which is reverence, the fear of the Lord. It's a healthy, wise awe.
That's the one that leads to wisdom.
Right. And then there is pachad. That's the visceral dread, the terror that just destabilizes you.
And the Greek distinction is just as helpful.
It is. In Greek, you have the broad term phobos, where we get phobia for general feels. But the New Testament consistently challenges delia.
And Delia is.
Cowardice, that's the specific fear that Scripture calls out.
So the goal isn't to get rid of all dread or general fear.
Yeah.
Because Gethsemane proved that's impossible.
Impossible. The goal is to reorient that wise, yara, fear toward reverence for God to prevent the delia, the cowardice, from controlling our actions.
So Delia is the fear that refuses to act.
When obedience requires it, yes. In a modern context, delia is why a capable leader fails to advocate for a just cause, or avoids a necessary conflict, or refuses to take a calculated, honorable risk.
And the sources point out that this leads to what they call the tyranny of safety.
It's a provocative phrase, isn't it? We're all trying to build safer processes, safer structures.
All the time. But how does that pursuit of safety mask a lack of trust?
Because the pursuit of absolute control, of guaranteed outcomes, it becomes an idol. It's masking a fundamental lack of trust in God's sovereignty. Courage often requires acting precisely where you have no control. Think of Esther.
Approaching the king, she had zero control.
Zero. Or Abraham leaving home without a map. That is leadership anchored in trust, not in a perfect risk assessment.
This brings us to a crucial comparison then, distinguishing that true courage from the loud, superficial kind we often see celebrated.
Yes, the false courage that collapses under pressure. The sources are really clear on its traits.
Like bravado.
Exactly. Bravado prioritizes image over quiet obedience. Peter's vow to die with Jesus is the classic example. It was all self-generated audacity, and of course it faltered. The second pressure was applied.
But another form is recklessness,
Right.
confusing impulse with faith.
Yes, ignoring wisdom for some dramatic gesture. And maybe the most insidious is what the sources call spiritualized ambition.
Which is what? Taking your own desires for influence and just baptizing them in religious language.
That's a perfect way to put it, yes. And these forms, bravado, recklessness, spiritualized ambition, they get a lot of attention. They get applause. But they lack the anchor to sustain long-term, costly faithfulness.
Whereas true courage is often quiet.
It's quiet, it's costly, and it's often unseen. It's measured by faithfulness, not by public validation.
A great example of that is Joseph resisting Potiphar's wife. That act was hidden. It required sustained integrity under daily pressure, and there was absolutely no public reward for it.
And you can map that directly onto corporate integrity today. Courage isn't always the dramatic whistleblower. Sometimes it's the quiet leader in a meeting who just refuses to cut a corner.
Or insists on honoring a promise even when it hurts the bottom line.
Right. It's that consistent choice to obey a higher standard when no one is watching. That quiet integrity is so much more resilient than a momentary burst of bravado.
So let's circle back to that principle. Confidence follows action.
It's so critical. Abraham's faith grew as he moved. Peter's real, enduring confidence was forged by the act of stepping onto the water, not before.
Which is critical for leaders to hear. If you wait for confidence, you're going to wait forever.
Forever. You act in obedience, and assurance is formed in the process. We see this with Joshua after Moses. The familiar anchors, Moses' leadership, his authority, they were gone.
So he had to lead without precedent.
Exactly. Anchoring solely in God's promises and the Word. That required sustained, quiet courage, not some big flash of public heroism.
Okay, so we have redefined courage. We've identified the counterfeits. Let's make this practical. How do we actually cultivate this?
Right. How do we turn this into daily formation? The sources emphasize that courage is a habit, not a singular event. It's forged in the steady rhythm of daily obedience.
It's that phrase, long obedience in the same direction.
That's the one. And since fear is a diagnostic for disobedience, we need a practical tool to translate that anxiety into conscious action. The sources give us something we can call the obedience inventory, or fear mapping.
Okay, walk us through that. If I'm facing a tough decision, say, launching a new project with high risk and potential for criticism, and I feel that anxiety, how do I map that fear?
Okay, first you name the specific fear. Is it fear of financial loss? Fear of criticism? Both.
Let's say it's both.
Next, you use that fear as the diagnostic. What idol is it exposing? Fear of criticism might expose an idol of human approval. Fear of financial loss could expose an idol of self-reliance.
Okay, so that's step one. Name the fear, identify the idol. What's step two?
Step 2 is to clarify God's command in that situation. If the fear is delaying a good, necessary project, the command might be about diligence or faithfulness, or simply moving forward in a direction you believe is right.
So the key question is, what specific act of obedience is this fear trying to stop right now?
That's the question. Your fear wants you to stay comfortable, but obedience might require you to send the email, make the call, launch the project.
So step three is to just choose one actionable step.
A specific, actionable step aligned with that command despite the emotional hesitation. The goal isn't to wait for the anxiety to go away, it's to act while it's there. This makes fear a guide for where to deploy obedience, not a governor that stalls you.
And over time, this fear mapping becomes a deeper spiritual discipline.
It does. You start tracing your recurring fears to their root attachments, the need for control, the fear of criticism, and you intentionally overlay those roots with scripture and a long-term action plan. Fear stops being a threat and becomes a teacher.
A teacher that shows you where you're fundamentally trusting in the wrong things.
Precise.
So, to wrap this deep dive up, we've moved so far beyond the cultural myth of fearlessness. We've landed on this reality of trembling obedience. True courage is a resilient, lifelong posture of trust.
It's measured by fidelity to God's will, not by your emotional state, and certainly not by public recognition.
Fear is going to be there.
It will inevitably accompany life and leadership. You will face uncertainty. The decisive question isn't whether you feel fear, but whether you walk with God anyway. We're invited to be faithful, not fearless.
And for our final provocative thought today, one that really builds on this tension, the sources state that the goal is not fearlessness, but alignment. Alignment between what you believe and how you act.
Between conviction and conduct.
So we'll leave you with this to consider. Which assumptions about leadership, success, or even spiritual maturity need to be released? Which idols need to be surrendered so that obedience and trust, not comfort or confidence, become the true measure of your courage today?
Let that question guide your next step of obedience, no matter how small or trembling that step may be.
Thank you for joining The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.